The fight for affordable housing.
Okay.
Currently, we typically support affordable housing with taxpayer-funded grants and loans to private developers. Would you support provincial government, provincial investment in long-term agreements and multi-decade agreements with, rather than private developers, with municipalities, nonprofits, and cooperatives to provide nonprofit and public affordable housing?
Could you just repeat that last line there, sorry?
Would you support a provincial investment in long-term agreements with municipalities, nonprofits, and cooperatives to provide that public housing, rather than exclusively private developers?
Is this sort of kind of what's down just off the bypass? Is that kind of the same thing, or is this more? I'm just trying to think of an example, like even if you could give me an example.
Well, there's cooperative public housing down along Water Street, for instance.
Oh, yes, okay, yeah. So I do think so, yeah. I think it's very important to make sure that, because again, this is something that's been coming up on the campaign trail as well. You know, people are making sure that, you know, affordable housing is something that and I know from the province's point of view, with the mobile rental vouchers, you know, of course, you want to make sure that people have a place to stay at night. You know, that's one of the most important things, I think, for anyone. You don't want to make sure that anyone does not fall through the cracks, you know.
I think the distinction the question is getting at is the different way of funding it, because so that you don't have a situation where a private developer sticks in support of some affordable housing, but then after the development agreement has expired in 15 years says, well, you know, that's that, see you guys later, I'm raising the rent, and you can find your affordable housing somewhere else. You're talking about a long-term agreement, 40, 50, 60 years, so that when people rent there, they know that they won't have to move for their lives.
Yeah, and of course, I think, you know, that people want to make sure that they have that guarantee in place, and I think, again, you don't want those people to be falling through the cracks, so you want to make sure that they are looked after, and hopefully that's kind of answering your question.
This question is from the fight for affordable housing. So currently, we typically support affordable rental housing with taxpayer-funded grants and loans to private developers. Would you support provincial investment in long-term agreements with municipalities, nonprofits, and cooperatives to provide that public housing? And by long-term, we're talking half a century, 50 years.
Yes, every person that I've ever talked to, that you've ever talked to, we all know that it's a joke when they say that some private company is building affordable housing. Well, of course, he's rich, so it's affordable for him. But there's people, like, we just cannot possibly dream of paying those rents. And in the real low income, it's just pathetic. All we need is, well, we used to have public funding, the federals gave it, the provincial government gave it, and it has to be based on income. It has to be long-term, 50, 70 years. None of this P3 business, the labor unions will tell you all the ways to waste money on those. And we're the only party that's going to say, we want it publicly funded, we want it stable, we want it environmentally friendly, we want it to be part of the community, not just one horrible place that you can't even get to. It has to be something that they would live in, something I could live in. And cooperatives are great, and I know people who live in them, and they're really wonderful too.
Thank you.
This question is from the PEI Fight for Affordable Housing. Currently, we typically support affordable rental housing with taxpayer-funded grants and loans to private developers. Would you support provincial investment in long-term agreements with municipalities, nonprofits, and cooperatives to provide nonprofit and public affordable housing? And I think there was a bit of subtext to this question, we boiled it down a bit, but in terms of long-term, we were talking about like 50, 60 years rather than the typical 10, 15 that you see now.
Yeah, absolutely. We need to be realistic and know that there's always going to be private investment that goes hand in hand with growing our communities. But that doesn't mean that the government doesn't have a place and can be separate from that. So long-term deals, I think they're important. I think we need a long-term plan to go with that. And that plays back to how do we engage the municipalities, how do we engage the citizenship to make sure that the long-term plan is fluid for a changing community, but also is there and concrete and sustainable. So at the end of the day, I think absolutely we need those investments, and we have to kind of do that in concert with private investments from a different realm. So it's about realistically getting us out of this crisis right now, while looking to the future and framing a long-term vision. So in short, absolutely.